Well, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be here today with Enboarder's CMO, Andrea Dumont. And we're going to talk to you about human connection, how it can make the biggest impact on your business productivity and attrition. Before we commence, I'd just like to do a welcome to the country. The webinar is being conducted on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, and we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are broadcasting today, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. We also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders online today. Just some housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with other professionals. And if you have any questions, there is a Q&A box, which we'd appreciate if you could use, or if you have any comments, there's a chat box. So just to kick us off, could we please know where it is that you're listening from or today, please? Could you throw it into the chat? Not seeing too many people using that chat. Come on, guys.
Chat is disabled.
Oh. Righto. Well, there we go. Perhaps we'll move on, Andrea.
Sounds good.
So just to set the tone in terms of what we're doing, we'd really like to know and get a sense of how your organisation is helping you build better connections at work. So we've got a quick poll. Could I please ask you to respond to that? As you can see, it's in front of you now, building better connections at work. Okay. So Kate Dixon's in Homebush today. Thanks, Kate. Welcome, Dan. Good to see you online. Greeters in Singapore. Wow. Andrea, looks like we've got a mixed group there.
Indeed, we do.
Right. Okay. So what I'd like to do now is introduce Andrea and get her to tell us a little bit about herself, please.
I am happy to. Thank you so much. And I guess it's a little mix of everything. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are calling in the world. And thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. I head up marketing here at Enboarder, and my career really has been focused in the HR space, really focusing on all aspects of technology from the recruiting side and the talent acquisition side, all the way through the talent management side. So I have a really strong understanding of kind of the foundation of the employee journey and what technologies we could potentially use to assist creating connections across your organization.
Fantastic.
So I'm actually going to start with a question, if we could, to all of you. And if this is just another poll that's going to come up, my question is this: what does your personal workplace look like today? Are you working remote, 100% in the office, or are you working a hybrid schedule? So if you could take a minute and let's see the focus here.
I'm personally remote. What about you, Andrea?
Yeah, we have a little bit of mixture of everything, it looks like, which makes complete sense. I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out this return to work and what it means. And most importantly, the focus on how do you make connections, right? For the better part of 3 years or so, we've been either completely remote or really trying to figure out how we get back into the office. So with the majority of folks really still doing the hybrid situation, it really does change how you create connections. So let me give you just a little few stats here, if I could, just to settle and kind of ground ourselves in the conversation we're going to have today. So Gallup found that 9 out of 10 remote capable employees prefer the flexibility, and 6 out of 10 prefer the hybrid work. And since a lot of you are doing hybrid work, that should be absolutely no surprise. The most recent unemployment numbers from the Australian Bureau of Statistics are still at a near 13-year historic low at 3.7. And you pair that with the number of available jobs, and the war for talent has never been more tense and anxious driven in terms of really finding that right person for the role. And then we have the Great Reshuffle still in effect. And the Great Reshuffle is kind of a situation where PwC just did a recent study on this, actually, that 20% of your workforce says they're likely to switch jobs within the next 12 months. Meaning they just started a job, but they're continuing their job search, and they're going to switch jobs within the next 12 months. So what can you do as an employer to make sure that they do not leave so quickly within your organization? And finally, the crisis of belonging is happening with many workers. So McKinsey found that 51% of employees who left their jobs in the past 6 months did so because they lacked a sense of belonging. And just last week, actually, Forbes posted an article that said about 25% of employees feel like they don't belong, and while 40% say they feel isolated. So that's just to frame the discussion of why are we here? What is happening? And it's the concept of the types of struggles that have changed over time. It's not just how we work, but where, and also the bigger focus on work-life balance, recent hiring freezes, labor shortages, the need for different skills, and the list can go on and on, as I'm sure you all are aware. So we recently talked to HR leaders and we said, okay, what is happening in your workforce and what is keeping you up at night? And it's not the fact that they're necessarily going to lose talent. It's the concept of how can we create a sense of connection and community within their organization?
That's fascinating, Andrea. It's really interesting to see what's happening today in Australia. I don't think our inflation and our economic issues are as bad as what we're seeing in some of the other countries. But we're certainly seeing that in some IT areas, there's some quite, some redundancies and things like that. So there's some uncertainty. And so that, I think, really increases the need for connection and that sense of belonging that you were talking about. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the uncertainty piece makes connection even more important. We always have the concept, if you have a best friend at work, you feel like you're more stable at work and you have more, reassurance. And I know that some leaders have looked at that and said, oh, that's such a soft metric. So what else can I do? Well, it's not a soft metric when you think about the concept of retaining and engaging your employees to feel belonging, to feel like you fit, to feel like you have a bigger purpose, if you will, within your organization. All of that contributes to connection.
Andrew, we've got a question there from someone there about when were these reports out with PwC and Forbes? This seems to be before the recent cuts and continuing macro environment. Has this impacted these people looking to move in 12 months?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, the PwC one is within the last 4 to 5 months, and the Forbes one was literally last month. So I think that they're very, very recent. And interestingly enough, there hasn't been a follow-up necessarily study right now on focusing on whether that great reshuffle is going to continue, and whether or not that we're going to see the impact of that. So that'll be something as we kind of follow the trends and look kind of 6 to 8 months down the road, we'll take a look at that and see if the concept of connection really impacted that reshuffle.
Andrew, we're also getting some comments in terms of terminology, rather than some people are not liking best friend and preferred colleagues. When you're talking connection and things like that, is it different by country? Is it different by type of organisation or type of industry? What What do you
Yeah,
think?
no, actually, it's a great comment, Cheryl. I think you believe you gave that. I agree with you. The best friend term is really kind of soft. I couldn't agree more. The concept here on having a close connection with a colleague or somebody that can like really work with you and rely on you. And interestingly enough, it doesn't matter what geographic location you're in. That is consistent across wherever you work and you live in the world, whether it is a team, if you will, that is focused in one region, or a team that requires a lot of cross collaboration around the globe. It really is so interesting that statistic or that concept never goes away.
Cool.
All right. So the other thing I just wanted to comment, maybe some of you have heard of these folks, some of you have not. I won't belabor the point here, but it's just the concept of connection isn't a fad. Let's just face it, when you're intentional about building those connections, you will be more successful in your company, and your employees will be as well. So whether it's from Adam or Brene Brown and the concept of connection is why we're here, or whether it's Mackenzie talking about this concept of social capital within your organization and having that be the building block for all aspects of innovation in your organization. Again, the concept's not going away. So what can you do about it, right? So let me give some concepts there. So this isn't something that is surprising to us, that this is actually one of the biggest challenges to build connection at work. However, we wanted to see if we could at least try to find one. And what is the concept that's really going to tie that connection piece? So we partnered with an organization called Red Thread Research, and we did a report called this Rethinking Connection in the Hybrid Work World. And we surveyed about 700 leaders and employees around the world. And we created this working definition of connection. Connection are relationships with people, ideas, and information that help people get work done and feel they're part of something meaningful. And we also discovered that we can take that definition and apply it into kind of 3 core relational aspects in the workplace. So first, we have connection within your team. And this is an individual's relationship with their manager, their teammates. And this is an employee's, I would say, most immediate relationship, and ensures that they can contribute effectively to their team and complete their daily work. So this is where employees discover and develop a sense of belonging, trust, and acceptance, I would say, that are essential building blocks to making connections. The second bucket we found is the bucket of building connections across teams. So not only do we need to be connected to our own teams, but generally speaking, individual departments can't live in silos. So we need to make sure that there are ways for different departments to feel aligned as not only people, but teammates. And this helps with collaboration, agility, and really makes a better sense of community and belonging. And our final bucket that we found is the one employees feel with the organization. There is certainly a greater sense today than there ever has been before to feel like you're part of something bigger when you're at work. So it could be the mission, the culture, the purpose, the vision of your organization. And that's why those things are so important, because you're trying to build connection with employees through those channels. And this can often take time, or it can make or break you if an employee decides to stay or even just join a company. So when you build a better connection between your employees and the company as a whole, it's going to improve agility, it's going to improve engagement, and overall employee and customer satisfaction.
Andrea, you're working with some pretty big brands globally. And do you find, if it's a larger organization, that connection is not as good as a smaller or a medium-sized organization?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I find that organizations do it differently, right? So in smaller organizations, even when you're working hybrid, it's easier to know everyone. It's easier to find a way to make that connection with your fellow teammates. In larger organizations, it's more about, I don't necessarily love this word, but institutionalizing connection. And what I mean by that is making it part of somebody's everyday activity. So whether it be through mentoring, whether it be through performance management, any type of use case across that employee life cycle that we are truly working through, you really have to make that concerted effort as a larger organization to make it part of that daily rhythm within your employees.
There's a question there from Mike, Andrea. How do you recommend someone motivate their employer that insists that each business function or team remains their own entity, essentially as their own thing? They're a silo. I mean, I've experienced that in a few organizations as well. How do you break down those silos?
Yeah, one of the things that we've done with at Enboarder with some folks is we basically create a connection, if you will, you can call it gamification, if you will, but it's more of a concept of, I want to, as part of my learning and development activities, learn more about, let's say, coding. And I want to learn from my IT or my development team, and I'm going to work with a mentor within that group to get that skill set. And so as a result of that, we're breaking down the boundaries, if you will, in terms of the business functions, because people want to grow and learn other aspects of the organization. We have organizations that are working with us where we have people do mini MBAs, for lack of a better term, where they do have those connections where you understand the economics of a business, the marketing of a business, how sales runs, et cetera. So that's one area I've seen incredible success, where you start using mentorship, learning and development, DE&I programs to break down those silos. And
is this, in terms of what's happening, is it reported to the C-suite? Are you getting sort of some traction at that level as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the great thing to show with the C-suite is there's, this concept of, oh, great, connection's fine. But what you really need to do is you need to show the business metrics, and the business metrics they care about are retention and engagement, right? So how can we show, if you will, that this connection is driving people to be more engaged in the organization, and retention is going up, and we're also not seeing dips like perhaps you used to in, let's say, graduate programs or things of that sort. So you got to really just do your baseline and then look at the retention and engagement metrics.
Fantastic.
All right, so let's kind of dive into this a little bit and talk about, why is this so hard? Because it's not easy. And I'm not sitting here saying we've got it all figured out, because I think many of you are looking at this saying, my God, where do I even start? So we found that there are 5 main challenges, if you will, that companies are facing when building connections. There's definitional confusion. There is certainly an unprecedented environment where people are like, nope, this isn't going to work for us. We are a group of introverts, perhaps, or we really have no desire to kind of come out of our shell. People are already overwhelmed and burnt out. There's social division and, of course, the economy and where we are today. But as we've already covered, there are so many different ways to define connection. So there's not one definition your leadership or yourself can use. And I think the best way to do this is to, go with companies that perhaps in a situation where you're not able to bring your entire workforce together in a face-to-face environment, which most of you are doing based on the poll of the hybrid workforce. And so how do you get that connection in that hybrid workforce, right? There's no concept or expectation that connection will go back to normal, if you will, like you were in a face-to-face. And I think the other piece here is the concept of not only being overwhelmed, but burnout, and not just burnout and overwhelmed with your work, but there also is feature fatigue. There are so many technologies out there that people can use, and it's not really sure which technology they use for connection, for communication, and it can get confusing, and we understand that. With regards to social division, I'm not sure if we've ever lived in a more polarizing time when it comes to social and political issues, particularly in the US. Because of that, many are seeing that permeate into work lives, and it turns into a harder, scenario for employees to connect the way they need to. And, the economy, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but obviously the uncertainty in the economy, how do we bring employees together and connect, can be deprioritized, right, in order to meet your financial goals. So, I actually, Trevor, would turn this over to you, because as I'd mentioned, we're certainly seeing this in North America. Are you seeing it in Australia as well? Does any of this resonate?
Oh, absolutely. I think, it's been, one thing after another with COVID, remote working, how organizations have adjusted. And, it's interesting how teams have adjusted quite automatically, but they're missing that face-to-face connection. And so it really is. I'd like to turn it to the audience as well, Andrea, in terms of, why do they think connection's so hard? Could we see some chat in terms of that? What are they seeing?
I see here something on introverts. Absolutely understood about that.
I'm not seeing that, but perhaps you could read it out.
Yeah, the concept of, introverts and connection are a dichotomy in the sense that many introverts are happy with self and don't have, necessarily the desire to reach out and make the connections. And I would offer this for that. We actually all just got together in Sydney for first time in 3 years. The entire company got together. And I know that's not possible for everyone, but I want to share the experience a bit, because we had a gentleman at the end of our event who was just an introvert, just as this person is mentioning, and really basically saying to our CEO just that when he goes to these kind of events, he sits there, he listens, but he is not the one to reach out, make the connections, and really have that engagement with people. But because we brought everybody together and we gamified for our event the concept of connection, people wanted to talk to him, and that was easier for him to come out of his shell. And so there was a way to kind of bring people together in a non-obtrusive way and make everybody feel comfortable.
What I'm hearing is that you're essentially personalizing this connection based on the organization, the department, and also the person, such that you can do it so people really connect.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
We've got some comments here, which is great. And there's one here about screen time in terms of that's a huge issue. Can you sort of comment on that in relation to how you're working with clients on this?
Yeah, I think we all suffer from it. I know I suffer from it as well. Absolutely. And I think a way to do that is to really kind of cut down on the noise and make the messages very purposeful, right? In terms of when you're going to need them to respond. And so it's not just a rash of just emails or, SMS messages, anything of that sort. It's take a step back and figure out how your employees want to be communicated to and make sure it's done in the way they want, but also purposeful so they get the value out of it.
And there's a comment here regarding working from home is great, but it discourages personal relationships and colleagues. So are you finding that by taking this type of action, you can create those connections?
Yeah, this is the battle, right, between hybrid and not. And I will say, we worked from home for 3 years during COVID, right? And so what my message to you on that is the managers and the leadership absolutely have to insist as part of their goals, their objectives, for how to create those connections. And it may be virtual lunches, it may be just something as simple as that, but you have to institutionalize, right? And kind of make sure it's part of your day-to-day culture and part of the employee experience that you want your teams to have. So it is absolutely something that you can make purposeful and you can institutionalize it. And that's where you can start. And actually, I've got some really good, if we can, I'll talk a little bit about kind of the strategies, right, that will set your organization apart and help you be more connected, if we can dive into that a little bit.
And there's a question there from Olivia regarding how do you actually do that? Can it give us some ideas, practical things? So let's
You got it. Absolutely. So I want to preface this by saying, just because you're fully remote as an employee and is not in the office, it doesn't mean they aren't building connections. So the office does not equal connection. Physical proximity does not automatically equal connection. So what matters when you get down to it a bit is the opportunity to intentionally build connection. So how do you go about doing that? All right, so first things first, you need to know exactly where to focus your efforts in order to help to enable them. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into the report we worked on with Red Thread, because we found that there are 4 aspects, if you will, to connection that run on 2 axes, forming a bit of a quadrant model. All right. So there's the emotional versus intellectual connection, and there is the forming versus deepening connection. So let me take a minute to walk you guys through this a little bit, because it does get into some of the practical advice on what you can look for in terms of programmatic elements. So the emotional connection is what employees feel. They feel accepted, like they belong, like they're plugged in, if you will. Intellectual connection is what employees need to know, the people, ideas, information within your organization. And sometimes I would say people need to form connections with new people or ideas and information. And other times they need to deepen their existing connection with other people and their work and the organization. So now that we understand kind of the concept of where connection comes from and how we experience it, this quadrant model can really be used to help you get a better understanding of where and how to enable communication within teams, enable connection with teams, across teams and with the organization. So think about your employee journey, right? This is what this is all about. So if you think about that journey that you want your employees to go on, all the way from your candidate experience to onboarding and mentoring and well-being initiatives, et cetera, all the way down to offboarding, the list of activities goes on and on that you can focus on, but they all can be looked at from this 4-quadrant model in order to create a more connected and thoughtful human experience.
Andrea, could you respond to, there's a bit of a paradox here in that, connection needs to be purposely built, but it also needs to cater for diversity. How do you sort of deal with that?
Yeah, actually, we have a lot of organizations that use kind of the Enboarder technology for DE&I programs in particular, and really creating workflows, if you will, or communication journeys to encourage connection around whether it be topics, whether it be initiatives within the organization around DE&I.
And if you encourage employees to participate, yet they don't, how do you sort of really get people to participate and be connected with that?
Yeah, 100%. So I've seen 3 kind of effective models, because it's always the difficulty when you're an HR professional trying to get people to put information into a system and participate in HR programs, right? So one of the things that has gotten such a high engagement rate with our customers is we have gamified it, we have made it fun, and we've made it relevant. And what I mean by that is that you can really take your profile and get a very relevant profile and a buddy system of folks that like kayaking, or folks that, enjoy, literature of some sort. And then all of a sudden you have a connection with these people on things that you like to do even outside of work. So it's not just about being productive at work, it's bringing that whole self and also being able to make the connections within the office and acknowledging the fact that there are other things besides, staring at your screen 24/7.
I think everyone likes when you talk about something about yourself and people remember that.
Yeah.
A comment here from Michelle, which is interesting too, which is people are very focused on themselves and achieving their goals rather than connecting with others. This does break that down to a certain extent, doesn't it, Andrea?
It really does. And actually for my team, I'll use myself as an example. Part of our goal set is mentorship, and it's also learning new skills. And so when I started this earlier in my career with my teams, I will say I am a English communications major that should have paid attention in statistics class a lot more than she did. So my skill set that I wanted to hone was, how do I get back into that and be with my business analysts and really understand the statistical analysis around all aspects of marketing? And that broke down so many barriers between understanding how we work together, but also it was programmatic in the sense that it was an expectation from me as a manager that we would absolutely, take up a new skill or reach out to another part of the organization.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We're being dragged back in some respects to remote working and hybrid working, and when people, and certainly my daughter at Deloitte feels this, that when she goes into the office, she's so focused on meetings and things like that, she doesn't have the time to socialise. And there's a comment here from Mike about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I will say the way that we are looking at our hybrid back to office policy is go into the office with intent. And what do I mean by that? When I go into our office, for example, I try to clear my schedule as much as possible so I have time for impromptu meetings. I have time with people that I can connect with. I make sure I go and schedule a lunch or a morning coffee, whatever the case may be. But you're going back to office with intent. You're not going back to the office to sit at your workstation, put your headphones on, and be in meetings 10 hours a day. That you can do at home. So what is the purpose of you as an employee of what you want to achieve by being in that office once, twice a week?
We're getting great interaction here. I'm really enjoying a lot of these comments. And that intent, that comment that you just made was just gold, Andrea. Let's proceed with the presentation.
Fantastic. All right. So with regards to the productivity, clearly, I mean, this is not a no-brainer. Of course, 94%, feel more productive when they feel connected at work. So, we won't belabor that number, but it's just further statistics, if you will, around the concept of how we can make people feel more connected. So let's move on to where we are here on the presentation. All right. So, as part of our research, what we look to find is that connection not only improves business results, but also when employees feel more connected to their coworkers, their company, how does their overall perception of the company improve? And what we found out is integral to employee wellness, and it has the power to move the needle on business outcomes. And I won't read all of these, but it's really kind of focusing on the concept of motivation, innovation, engagement, not only in the organization, but in HR programs, but also inclusivity. And that goes to the DE&I focus as well in terms of how people feel respected within the organization. So while hybrid work or way of work, if you will, is certainly here to stay, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. I'd love to talk a little bit more about how working in the office should be structured. And this goes to a little bit what I was talking about with intent. So according to our results of our workplace study, 69% of respondents said they are back to the office full-time, and 21% said they're working hybrid. So much with the multiple different, machinations, if you will, of how people are coming to work. I'd like to understand kind of from all of you a little bit in the chat function, what to you makes it interesting to go back to the office? Because in previous worlds, amenities like gyms and video games and snacks and even rock climbing walls, right, were really interesting for people in the office setting. And that has changed very much with the hybrid office situation, because that really no longer is the driving force behind people really wanting to come into the office. And really what's very interesting for us is that because those material aspects have been taken away, the sense of true human connection is what's come up to be more at the forefront. And I think connections really ultimately come from our peers. And about 93% of our respondents said that coworkers are what has the biggest impact on them feeling connected. And while managers certainly play an integral role, I would say, when it comes to employee engagement, we typically believe that managers had the biggest impact on helping our employees feel connected. And this is actually validated by Gallup as well. But the top activities that made them feel connected, and again, not rocket science here for anyone, but it's team meetings, it's one-on-ones, it's skill sharing, it's spontaneous in-office interactions, or even spontaneous kind of Zoom meetings as well, where it's not about business, but it is about kind of how people are doing. So now where we need to kind of spend our energy is ensuring that we are not putting up any barriers that would prevent people from feeling connection they so desperately need. So I think right now we have a poll, if I am correct, or a question that we want to ask the audience.
Yeah. What keeps employees from feeling connected? Could throw some things into the chat, that would be great. I know when I come into the office, Andrea, it's about that spontaneous connection, the people I don't normally see, to be able to bump into them and to catch up on things that I haven't spoken to them about in a long time. A smile.
Yeah, the never-ending meetings, totally get that. Trust me, I understand that completely. And yep, not being part of a team, lack of face-to-face, the coffee catch-up, 100%.
Now that terminology, let's catch up and have a coffee, it's almost sort of died in many respects over COVID, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And all of these are great scenarios. And again, this is the connection that you were making, whether it be formal or informal, when we were in the office. And as HR practitioners and kind of really looking at your employee experience, what we really want to help you understand is how you can take those spontaneous connections and still have them in a hybrid environment. And you can do that through workflows and for programmatic elements around connection, right? So let me kind of say that no matter how an employee is feeling disconnected, it's a highly individual thing, right? So it's very difficult to look at your entire organization and say, these are the 2 or 3 things that are going to reside with everyone. And, it's also worth noting that while employees are generally feeling much more connected to their coworkers than they were even a year ago, it isn't consistent across the board. And as you can imagine, remote employees are more than 3 times likely to report feeling disconnected. And even if you look at Gen Z, millennials, baby boomers, you've all got differentiation on how you want to be communicated with and how connection affects your day-to-day work. But we dug into some of the numbers, and there are other reasons for detachment. So the top instances of why employees are feeling disconnected is the following. 34% have different personalities and work styles from their coworkers. 29% having unsupportive or passive managers. 26% lack of transparency in business decisions and objectives. And 24% of, I choose not to get involved at all. I'm going to stay in my corner and do my thing. So I want to touch on that quickly, because it is okay for employees not want to participate in extracurricular activities or to join into happy hours. There's no rule that says everybody has to be a social butterfly. But the most important aspect is that they feel connected to the teams, their systems, the organizations, and the way they work that best fits them emotionally and intellectually. And I'll just reiterate, it's about being intentional, right? When trying to build those connections and using the quadrant that we shared earlier across your employee life cycle.
Andrea,
so
sorry,
yeah.
I'll just pop in. We've got a really interesting comment here from Michelle. Thanks, Michelle. I manage a large shift workers. I manage a lot of shift workers, and they work alone with clients in their homes. I struggle with how to connect with them in the organisation. Have you got any thoughts or ideas about what Michelle could do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Michelle. Thank you for that. And we actually work with a lot of organizations that have, for lack of a better term, right, now deskless, if you will, employees, right? Somebody who's not in front of a desk, not in front of the office, kind of working on a day-to-day manner. And what we do with those organizations is we really have a mobile first kind of strategy where we take your culture, your innovation of what you want your culture to be, and we work it into the workflows that we want to highlight in your culture. So for example, if you want them to feel connected in the onboarding journey, how can we send them messages before they even start, saying, this is your buddy, or here, we're so excited to have you here. Here's some paperwork or some information on the paper that you can fill before you fill out, or before your first day. And then as they onboard, constant connection with them, not only from their hiring manager, but getting them a buddy. And that way, even though they're not in an office, they feel connected to the organization because they feel a sense of inclusion and belonging.
Great answer. Thank you.
Any other questions we need to cover? I know we've got a bunch of stuff coming in, but I want to make sure we cover as many as we can.
No, I think we're good.
Okay, fantastic. So as you can imagine, another big roadblock, and I think somebody brought this up in the chat recently, is managers. Not all managers manage alike, and there's such disparity, right? So the top reason employees report feeling disconnected include having different personalities, work styles, if you will, for their coworkers. But this is followed closely by having what people are calling unsupportive or passive managers who are not actively engaged with them. So when we look at that, it's really difficult to depend on the manager to be the one who is helping to drive connection. So I go back to the concept as HR professionals, what can we do to kind of institutionalize and kind of put that roadmap in place so managers have a consistent process no matter where they work in the organizations. Okay. All right. So I know we have a lot of questions still to cover, so I just want to leave time for that, but I do want to leave this with a few thoughts before we come to a close. So feeling a genuine sense of connection is certainly one of the biggest factors, if you will, influencing our people's productivity, their job satisfaction, and even I would say their positive or negative perceptions of their workplace. So as employees settle back in, and whether they begin returning to office full-time, hybrid, we're seeing a positive trend in these feelings of connectedness, which is great. And we're also seeing and experiencing connection as the foundation that supports every initiative by putting human connection at the center of your business, right? Because once it's at the center of your business, then that is going to drive all the programmatic elements out to your employees that will drive connectivity, engagement, and growth. So as you're looking to help your employees transition to this new way of working, I want to leave you with a few key principles to keep in mind. First is the concept of superficial, artificial connection isn't going to cut it, right, in today's workforce. So employees are certainly looking to establish a more genuine relationship with their peers and the company they work for to, I would say, enable a true sense of belonging. And I think engage, the concept like we talked about of ping pong tables, foosball tables, they're still nice, don't get me wrong, but they aren't what employees are looking for anymore. True engagement is bred from the connection and ties to a greater purpose and mission in your organization. And then finally, grow. And what I mean by that is that employees want a new way and different way to excel in their career. And so it's not just about coming in and perhaps sitting in front of a screen for 3 hours on a pre-recorded L&D type of exercise. They want to create meaningful relationships across teams and within the organization, and using those connections to help them grow and learn in their skill set and in their professional development.
Andrea, we've got a question here or a comment, and I'd like to turn it into a question. And during the height of the pandemic, leaders were invisible, everyone was working remotely. Now leaders are back, but there's been a barrier. You've got to sort of break down that barrier that was created. I'm sure there are employees that don't know their leader as much as what they did before COVID. What are some of the tactics you could do from a human connection perspective to break down that type of barrier?
Yeah, great question. I think we are, and I'm going to expand that question a little bit, because we're also seeing perhaps leaders are no longer in a central office. They may be connected or living somewhere else in the world, which makes it even more difficult. What I have done with companies is this concept of planned spontaneity. And really what I mean by that is, as a leader, breaking out your calendar, whether you do it by first half of the year or by quarter, and finding a way in your schedule to prioritize the connection and prioritize your team and prioritize who needs to be connected to whom to do their job more effectively. So you really become the center of that connection wheel. And you are looking at team members who are perhaps really excited to expand in certain aspects of their career, or you're looking at people who are struggling in certain aspects of their career, and you are making those connections across the organization and across the team. And you have to be purposeful about it. It's not going to happen just automatically. And that's one of the big key drivers as a leader that is coming back, is to build that understanding of how your team wants to connect, when they want to connect, and on what topics.
When you've got a large organization and you've got different types of connections happening in different areas, can you, as a result of looking at some metrics, understand which of the connections are working better and then potentially try those in other areas of the company? Do you ever do that A and B side of things?
Yeah, you certainly can. I don't have any data on it from the report, but I think it's incredibly effective to look at different divisional aspects as they are making these connections to say, let's say learning and development worked exceptionally well in our research and development team, but perhaps it didn't work as well in the marketing sales organization. Why is that? What was the difference there? But that allows you to have a very different discussion with your executives than, well, our teams are just feeling isolated. Now you have data points to be able to go back and say, look, we've tried these 3 programs. They're working really well here, but not here. Let's diagnose what's going on. And do we need to take a different approach or have a different flavor?
Thank you.
All right. So with that, I would just say thank you all so much. I hope you enjoyed the session. As always, we are here to help you. So if you're interested in hearing how Enboarder can certainly help you build more human connections, and you want to talk more specifically about programmatic aspects, please just let us know in the poll. We would be more than happy to reach out and have a conversation with you. Our goal is to really help you thrive and make those human connections across your entire employee journey. So if there's anything at all that we can do to provide assistance, we are here to help you really drive those human connections.
And Andrea, on behalf of the audience and also the ATC, can I thank you? And I know I threw some curly ones at you there, my ideas and all the audience, but you've answered them really well, and there's many thank yous coming in from the audience in relation to that. So many thanks, Andrea. It was a really good session. I enjoyed it immensely.
Excellent. My pleasure. Thank you all so much for participating.
Cheers now.